The biggest challenge, in a way, is, I would say, some kind of fidelity to the notion of what a church is, that it's not simply a human institution, but exists in relation to the promise of God. That's a kind of systemic thing, runs right through the range of church life. But in practice, of course, at the moment, we are divided in quite a number of ways. We're divided perhaps more than we've been for a long time over how we use the Bible. And I think the gaps are widening a bit there. There's strong resistance to anything that looks like compromising the authority of Scripture. But the idea of the authority of Scripture that's supposed to be compromised is itself an idea which is, strangely, quite a modern one, as if the Bible has to be, in every respect, a 100% accurate guide to everything you can imagine from history to biology, rather than the dependable communication from God of who God is. Now, on that second analysis, I'd say I'm completely committed to the absolute authority of the Bible. I don't think that necessarily involves me in defending what the book of Daniel says about the date of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, or whatever it may be. But that kind of division is probably a bit deeper than it used to be. And I say this with some caution and reluctance in a way, but I sense that something of the culture of American fundamentalism has more and more successfully been exported into churches elsewhere in the world, largely in the so-called developing world, but also to some extent in other more historic Christian environments, as if there is an authentic Christian approach to the Bible, which is this and nothing else, whereas actually fundamentalism of that kind is a 19th century phenomenon coming from a particular place and a particular set of problems. So I worry a bit about that, and of course that spills over into, particularly these days, our attitudes around gender and sexuality. And it's an open secret. Every Christian community is deeply divided on these questions. And for a good many churches, especially of a more traditionalist colouring, any sort of flexibility around issues to do with gender and sexuality becomes a primary matter of faith, a primary matter of Christian identity, so that diversity on the subject, conscientious difference of opinion, is just not possible. And that I find a bit heartbreaking. At a moment when, in the world at large, it seems we desperately need something of a coherent voice of hope from the churches. The churches are turning away from the world, and sometimes it seems to be away from God. Their face is not towards the world or towards the Creator, but towards one another, in a kind of angry shouting match. And what does that say to our world? Nothing very hopeful or joyful. So I don't see a short answer to that question, and I'm not pretending there is one. I note it as a real wound in the church's witness at the moment, and one which, as I say, every major Christian body is trying to deal with in one way or another, and mostly not very well. There is, I think, a cultural moment where we're in, where the notion of persuasion is quite difficult for people to accept. Because persuasion, as opposed just to, say, victory in conflict or debate, persuasion is about understanding the other to such an extent that you can make sense to them in a way that makes your making sense attractive. And I look at the American election at the moment and think nobody's trying to persuade anybody. Nobody's putting forward an argument of any kind. This is pure tribal bellowing. Dinosaurs bellowing across the primeval swamp. And it baffles me that people think that is a sustainable way of social living. Because actually, break it down into the local, the immediate, and we live by persuasion. We live by finding things we can just about cope with in one another, with the hope that perhaps minds will change. We live with a degree of provisionality and a hope that just being with one another makes certain things possible. Now, take away that hope, take away that provisionality, and you end up with what, as I say, I think is an unsustainable way of living. And as I sometimes like to put it, the awkward fact is the person who doesn't agree with me will still be there tomorrow morning. What am I going to do about that?